Only the MCU could develop such a strange and intriguing show that's so well received. The MCU in its entirety is a massive undertaking. What started off as a chance on Robert Downey Jr. has turned into one of the most successful entertainment franchises of all time. WandaVision comes at an important time in the MCU. It's the first MCU property released during COVID, it's the first MCU television series. Disney Marvel is in a fantastic exploratory position to tell a variety of stories. Origin stories, for example, are important, but they can happen in media res. The MCU doesn't have to dedicate an entire movie to someone's origin. This leaves more room to tell interesting, exciting, and more compelling stories, especially ones that we can relate with. But allow me to not get too ahead of myself because I could dive into the MCU for hours. Let's focus on everyone's new favorite witch. That's right, Sabrina, you just got replaced. WandaVision is a clever little title for Marvel's trippy sitcom adventure. I feel like it manages to give you a sense of what the show is about, beyond just the characters Wanda and Vision, without actually giving away what the show was going to be about. It takes place between Endgame and Far From Home, for all of you wondering where this fits into the continuity of things. That doesn't mean too much for the entirety of the show except for the location of Nick Fury and to let you know that Wanda's wound is still pretty fresh. Starting off, that's one of the most interesting aspects of the show. It was released in 2021 and Infinity War, which is when Vision died, was in 2018 and Endgame was in 2019. However, there's that 5-year time gap between the 3 snaps. You as the viewer have had quite a bit of real-time and in-universe time to accept the death of Vision as many others came alongside of it. WandaVision makes you reposition yourself to the world of hurt that Wanda is in currently. This aspect isn't revealed in the first episode because the show is going to spend some time playing out the sitcom aspect of the show. You have to give Disney Marvel some credit here. They committed to the theme and executed it well. Wanda and Vision go through multiple eras of classic television mimicking the styles of Bewitched all the way to Modern Family. Depending on the episode, the era of television WandaVision decides to mimic doesn't come off as a parody, but commits well enough to become actually believable as you watch it. Sure, there are obvious callbacks and Easter eggs to these shows, but each episode of WandaVision feels like its own TV show. I was just as interested in the 30-minute plot as much as Darcy was. Custom MCU Easter egg-filled commercials made the experience all the more authentic while keeping you attached into the universe. Although the episode runtimes fall a little short of expectations, they seem to fall in line with your standard episode on primetime cable during those eras. WandaVision ultimately is a show about identity and therapy. The obvious of the two pieces is identity. We all know Wanda as the Scarlet Witch, but she has never been called that in-universe. We get a slight origin story for Wanda and the introduction of witches in-universe. We've seen magic with Doctor Strange, but we haven't seen witches yet. A large part of the journey is Wanda slowly figuring out this identity as she interacts with Westview, Vision, Agatha, and her children. Parallel to that, though, is a much darker story dealing with Wanda's mental state. Basically, you can view the entirety of the events with Westview as therapy. Potentially, this plot supersedes the former. Wanda has lost a lot. Most recently, Vision. Pietro died back in Avengers 2. Her parents died tragically due to Stark Tech when she was younger. She also carries a lot of guilt for what happened in Lagos. On top of all this, when the 4th snap occurs, a lot of loved ones come back. There's reason to rejoice all throughout the universe. However, Wanda doesn't get to celebrate. She doesn't get anyone back. So her trauma mixed in with the fact that you are one of the odd ones out when it comes to the 4th snap really sets Wanda on a pretty bad course mentally. WandaVision, her show, is an extremely long therapy session at the expense of others. Is it labeled that way? Of course not, but that's what it ends up being. Wanda literally creates her own safe space because she's having an extremely hard time dealing with the death of her lover. The entirety of the show, while focused on the identity aspect, actually gets Wanda a little bit closer to dealing with her past. Wanda literally has to relive the past to move forward thanks to Agatha. This not only provides some much needed exposition, but also acts as a bit of a therapy session for Wanda. Wanda loves to run from things. As bad as Agatha is, she makes Wanda face her own past and her own identity. Wanda is using an entire town to run from her grief. Wanda is ignoring the fact that she's an extremely powerful witch. At the resolution of these events, she's able to let the town go. She's able to give up a life with Vision and her children. All were existent based on her magic, There's a strong question to what was real and what wasn't, but that will be answered later. The important thing is that without emotional outbursts, Wanda accepted it and moved on. For the most part anyway. But in between the death glares from the townsfolk Wanda gets, you do have to consider who is the bad guy here. I think that the point is that it's gray for a reason and potentially another indication that not everything is black and white with our heroes. I'm glad Wanda knows who she is, but the people who are scarred for life do deserve some justice. In the midst of these competing plot lines, you get to see Monica Rambeau emerge as Spectrum, or Pulsar, or Photon, or Daystar, or Captain Marvel. She's got a bunch of comic aliases and the MCU has not decided on a name yet. Jimmy Woo from Ant-Man also returns with a solid role assisting Monica. Darcy Lewis, who we haven't seen since Thor: The Dark World, even plays a great supporting role. You also get to see the introduction of S.H.I.E.L.D, which besides the time travel in Endgame is one of the worst plot holes in the entirety of the MCU. First and foremost, S.H.I.E.L.D is absolute garbage. One of the most blatantly ignored questions is how S.H.I.E.L.D got Vision's body in the first place. I'm having a hard time seeing the remaining Avengers just being cool with that going down and Wakanda being okay with a vibranium super soldier going into someone else's hands. I've seen responses online that the Sokovia Accords would request Vision's bodies back to the States and that Wakanda would have been in pretty bad shape without its king for 5 years. Two things on that. I would agree with the Wakanda comment, it's a lot to assume, but I get it. Two, how do we know if the Sokovia Accords are being enforced post-snap? The world as a whole was in pretty bad shape, and the Avengers seemed to be operating on their own accord anyway during Endgame. I'm having a hard time seeing that be the prime excuse S.H.I.E.L.D uses to get Vision's body. I'm also having a hard time seeing Wakanda just hand over all that vibranium to an organization they don't have any affiliation with, but I guess during the snap was some pretty hard times. Hayward is supposed to be an antagonist and an unlikable character, but oftentimes because you are aware of the scope of the power of the Avengers, Wanda specifically in this case, you wonder how one person could be so stupid. The fact that Hayward is not dead is actually surprising, as the amount of times he pushed Wanda's buttons is unreal. S.H.I.E.L.D makes absolutely no sense in MCU continuity. I feel bad that I have to ding the show for this, but I do. S.H.I.E.L.D is mentioned twice in the MCU, during the show and during Thor. It's never been fleshed out to the organization that it is today. We're led to believe Maria Rambeau started this organization post the events of Captain Marvel. That would be acceptable if S.H.I.E.L.D was mentioned in that movie or any of the other 4 Avengers movies that had cosmic level events occurring. S.H.I.E.L.D is just absent. It's understandable from a writing perspective because Disney Marvel was just not there yet, but not even attempting to retcon why S.H.I.E.L.D hasn't been present throughout the timeline just seems lazy. I'd be willing to give S.H.I.E.L.D a pass if there was a time jump included for the show, but there isn't. So not only am I supposed to believe that S.H.I.E.L.D has existed for years, but they had their crap together during both snaps to be able to respond to Wanda's Hex event? S.H.I.E.L.D also created a sentient AI replica of Vision. Does that seem like a stretch to you? Feels like a stretch for an organization that virtually came out of nowhere. Yes, they did have parts of Vision's body, but the creation of Vision originally was the work of Ultron. It seems like an intelligence level between an extremely sentient AI with a god complex and S.H.I.E.L.D is rather far apart, but what do I know? Moving beyond even that, WandaVision has 9 episodes with an interesting finish, obviously leaving room for Monica to grow into the next hero, Wanda getting a somber but satisfying ending that will lead into Doctor Strange 2, Agatha getting her comeuppance, but it doesn't wow you. I'm regretting staying up to 3 a.m. to watch the finale to see the events play out as I expected. I believe most of us are disappointed that Wanda's journey ended on an extremely healthy note, which is pretty messed up on the surface, but hear me out. All the fan theories, Mephisto, mutants coming into the picture, Doctor Strange showing up at the end to reel Wanda in didn't happen. I think from an empowerment perspective, Wanda reaching her own healthy conclusion was the best route to go for the show. The last thing we needed was a white patriarch saving the day, but I think a lack of a blockbuster ending got to a lot of people. It got to me. Having the X-Men version of Pietro come through seems pointless now. The fans are partially to blame. We ran pretty wild per usual regarding our fan theories and who was coming through. However, based on the way that the show was presented, Pietro showing up, Wanda's kids having powers and being mutants, Elizabeth Olsen promising a Luke Skywalker-esque cameo, the entirety of the show, Even if you aren't familiar with the MCU, WandaVision seems to be building to something much bigger than you know. However, the result is what I would expect out of a CW Arrowverse finale, wrapping up the majority of the plot lines neatly while leaving some room for the next season. Unfortunately, with WandaVision, what we get is what we get, and a second season seems unlikely. Any additional questions will have to be wrapped up in other MCU properties not entirely focused on Wanda, which seems tragic. I think the bar was set pretty high for an MCU television series, and for 8 episodes, I think they met that bar. On the 9th, I feel the MCU magic missing that not only gets me excited for the next part, but has me craving for more. I don't know if WandaVision is necessarily worth the rewatch with such short episodes, with only small bites actually relevant to the entirety of the plot until later episodes. The last thing I'll mention is Disney Marvel may be trying to make us aware of the future state of the MCU. Vision has some interesting character building in the series as well. It comes to an interesting conclusion between the ship of Theseus, the thought experiment, and Vision crying. To focus on the former though, I don't think the thought experiment is purely for Vision and White Vision. I think it's regarding the MCU as a whole and the Avengers. We don't know how many more roles Chris Hemsworth Thor is going to be in. Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark is gone. Scarlett Johansson is seemingly done as Black Widow. Chris Evans is done as Cap. Chadwick Boseman is gone. Jeremy Renner as Hawkeye seems to be passing the torch. Professor Hulk only has one arm and seems to be playing a lesser role in the Avengers. If you replace all the roles, is it really still the Avengers? Is it really still the MCU? White Vision, while being completely different but full of memories of the original Vision, claims that he is Vision. I think Disney Marvel ponders a similar scenario. If you are full of the memories of the past, 23 movies including Far From Home, but if the majority of the original Avengers are gone, are they the real Avengers? Who are the real Avengers? The new or the old, or both? WandaVision is an excellent show missing the dramatic finish. Had it had one, we would be discussing a near perfect score for it. I think the way you watch WandaVision also adds into the execution of it. Watching week to week provides different results because of your expectations than binging it. Was it worth the 8 weeks to watch this every Friday based on what was revealed? Or is this something that you can just binge in a day and be caught up? Marvel will tell you week to week, but the runtime on these episodes will tell you to kill this on a long Saturday. 8 out of 10. I'm excited to see what they can do with Falcon and Winter Soldier, especially in 6 episodes, so that's going to be a lot less than Wanda, but those episodes may be potentially longer, but they've set the bar. Let's see what they can do with it. I'm excited to see the rest of the properties throughout the rest of the year and extremely excited for Black Widow. Thanks for joining me on Black Man's Log.